Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Grow Like a Mother podcast. I am your host, Jill. I have a really fun conversation lined up for us today. I am chatting with fellow mom Greer, who is the mom of two and has two dogs as well. She lives in the UK, but is originally from the US. And she's navigating this journey of raising a child with additional needs, much like I am, and some of you as well. She's passionate about creating spaces for honest and open conversations. Greer really loves connecting with people over coffee or just sharing the everyday joys and struggles and lessons of parenting a neurodivergent child. And so she has her own podcast as well. It's called The Unfinished Idea, and I will be a guest over there. I'll make sure that the episode is linked in the show notes here so you can hear our continued conversation over on Greer's podcast. But today she's here chatting with me about her experience, the diagnosis of her son, that her own journey of diagnosis with ADHD, and we get into it. Two moms chatting about our experiences. I know that if you're listening, you will hear something in here that either relates to you or that you can totally feel aligned with. If you don't have a neurodivergent child, maybe you know someone who does, and you're not sure how to interact with them or with their kid without causing offense. You want to be supportive, but you don't know the rules or the right things to say, and that can often be a challenge too. And sometimes there are people in our lives who have kids with special needs, and we don't see the behind the scenes of how different their lives are because they might look similar to ours on the outside. But when you dive deep, there's lots of things that we as parents of neurodivergent kids are dealing with, and our realities are very different than yours. So it's a really nice opportunity to sort of get the behind the scenes sneak peek at that as well. So whether you have a neurodivergent child or not, whether you are neurodivergent or not, this is a really great conversation. I will also point you back to a conversation I had on emotional intelligence last year. Haiba Tanvir is a friend and a really excellent resource for all things emotional intelligence. In our episode together, we talked about practical tips for, using creative methods for helping kids express their emotions, setting clear boundaries. These are all things that, especially if you're the parent of a neurodiverse child, are really important, but for all parents. And just really discussing how self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship building, all of those skills can help to create a nurturing home environment, which is, as moms, what we're all about. So head back and listen to my conversation with Haiba. I think you're really going to love it. And without further ado, I will welcome Greer to the Grow Like a Mother podcast. Greer, thank you so much for being here with me today. I am really excited to get to talk to you and introduce you to the audience at the Grow Like a Mother podcast. But I'd love to start sort of in your own words. Can you give us a sense of who you are and what you're all about?
So I'm Greer. I am from the US, but I now live in England, and have lived in England for about 15 years, married to a Brit, have two kids. We've bought a house, so this is now home. And yeah, I'm a mom to I always kind of say I'm a mom to two boys and two dogs, and I'm the only girl in the whole house. Um, so we are, my husband in medicine, and then I work for a charity doing communications, but then also on the side of all the other things, I also have a podcast where I talk about the everyday joys and struggles of raising a neurodivergent child, but as well as being neurodivergent.
I love that. And I, as you know, also have a bunch of neurodiversity here in this household. So I'm all about that. Can you give us a bit of the background story, whatever you feel comfortable sharing in terms of how this was either diagnosed or brought to your attention in your kiddo, in yourself, and like how it has impacted the way that you move through the world?
Yeah, so it's about so my oldest was born in 2019, and the first year of life was normal. And then just after his first birthday, here in the UK, the world just shut down because of COVID. And we were in lockdown, like we didn't see anyone. And because my husband's in medicine, we were just extra kind of cautious. So we just literally did not see anyone for about 18 months. And it was kind of when we were coming out of COVID. I don't know if we can or lockdowns at least, we kind of just started noticing like some different things about our son, just how he was processing the world and just like social cues and things, as well as kind of his speech. That was a bit delayed. We knew he was communicating with us, but he just couldn't quite say the words. And so from yeah, about 2.5, we just were like, okay, let's maybe explore a few things. And we've had GPs like tell one GP told me my son's speech was delayed was because of my American accent, which yeah,
Wow.
everyone's like, that's weird. And then just different things like we just kind of weren't really sure. We're navigating a world we didn't know we were navigating. And so he then went to nursery, which is like preschool here in the UK. And they were also just, they were really negative, and it was actually really hard. They told me I was a horrible parent. They said, my child was a problem child, just different things. And it was just really hard because I knew what he was experiencing wasn't right, but I didn't totally know what it was, if that makes sense. And so I went to GP, again, different GP than before. And she was really good at just sitting down going like, oh, I think like I'm going to refer him for ADHD, as well as autism, just because of what she was noticing. And she was really good, probably the first stepping stone into the neurodivergent world, really, and just gave some good leaflets. They were very basic and minimal, but they were at least like a step, going from kind of nothing stroke what Google was telling me to something. And then our son started school. And so we, in the UK, they start school at 4. And we met with the school before he started and said, he's been referred for these diagnoses. We want to help you. We're still learning ourselves, but we wanted to, you know, have this conversation before he started so he could transition well. Because that was something we also noticed since about 2, that transitions were very difficult for him, which is, as I now learn, very, very normal for neurodivergent. But so yeah, so doing in that that meeting was fine. It was just a meeting. I didn't feel like they really totally got what we were saying, but also just it was a meeting it was. And they very much took the approach of, we'll just see how it happens. We'll see what happens and we'll go with it. So it was on the second day of school, and the head teacher, the principal, pulled me aside and asked, well, didn't ask, just said, we're not coping with your son. Can he only do 2 hours a day of school? And that was at the time, I didn't know. Again, I was like very new to navigating this world. And so um, I didn't know what I could and couldn't do, or what was legal or not. And so I said, sure. And we did that for a few weeks, and they kept saying, oh, he's not getting any better. And I was like, yeah, because it's not right. Like I just kept saying it's not right. So thankfully I had a friend who, well, she's still my friend, who is a few years kind of beyond her son's about 10. And I was just having a chat with her and was like, do I need to pull him out? Like, does he need to go to a special school? Do I need to get a tutor? Like I was like, I don't know what to do. And she was just really helpful and just like downloaded all this stuff and was like, basically the school is being illegal to what is happening in your situation. So we finally met with the Synco, which is like the kind of coordinator for all special needs activities and children. And she, yeah, recognized that how that situation was dealt wasn't right and needed rectifying. So um, that was kind of, I think, after that meeting with her was a big point in my life where I realized I was going to have to really advocate for my son, and really be his voice, because, and not in a mean way, but just at least especially in the UK, it's a broken system. And these teachers and Syncos have every will in the world to help, but they're a band-aid in a massive wound. And so having to just be the advocate, and it was just kind of through that and some other kind of different situations that just realized a lot of the world doesn't know what it's like to raise a neurodivergent child. And so just being able to I just kind of started sharing on social media, and then kind of then started a podcast just sharing about the everyday, because I thought the world needs to know a little bit more. and to kind of replace, I like to say, I hope to replace stigma with life experience, because I think when doing that, a lot of barriers come down. So yeah, so that's kind of our journey with our son. In the middle of that, I was reading up a lot about ADHD and having conversations with people, and was like, oh, they're describing me. And so yeah, so it's only been about 9 months now that I'm still technically going through the process of getting diagnosed with ADHD, but very much yes, I realize I have ADHD, and that's been a very freeing thing for me, knowing it all makes sense. It like, oh, okay. And kind of it's this like weird joy grief kind of situation in that um there's joy in knowing things make sense, but also kind of grief of like, oh, I thought everyone had a million thoughts a day or had a bajillion ideas, or, kind of different things that I'm like, oh, I had thought this was normal and it's not necessarily. And so it's been definitely a journey. I'm very grateful for getting to have really good conversations with people about ADHD in women. That's also helped a lot. So yeah,
Hmm.
I kind of say I'm a baby ADHDer, because I haven't known about my ADHD for very long, but it's a big growing process.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that so vulnerably. I think that a lot of the listeners are going to be hearing their journey in your story. I know I certainly did many of the pieces with, that beginning when you're noticing your little guy is having some challenges, but also you're keeping, especially with your first, right? You're keeping an open mind, like, well, everyone learns differently, and boys might be slower than girls, and all of these things we're told, and then being sort of, poo-pooed by the medical community, right?
Mhm.
Um, and the school system is a whole other beast that, I mean, even in
Yeah.
Canada, in the UK, I'm sure in the States, the system seems to be broken everywhere. And I also am seeing um, sparks of hope through conversations like these that like the parents are having. Like I'm participating in a summit in March that's supporting parents of neurodivergent kids so that we can advocate and we can take care of ourselves because that's a whole other conversation about like it is so for anyone listening who doesn't have a child with a challenge or a special need of some kind, there are so many things that you would not expect that it impacts. Like, you might not be able to have a regular full-time job because your kid needs to be in therapies or can't attend school, right? Like that's the
Yeah.
case for me. I can't work a 9 to 5 job. My kid has all these different things that require extra time from me, right? You might not be
Mhm.
able to just hire a babysitter and go out for a date night because your kid has so many things that you need to make sure the caregiver is aware of and understands, especially if the child can't speak for themselves yet, right? There might be parenting challenges where we're talking about parenting one child one way who has a neurodiversity, and then the neurotypical kids are like, well, I don't under like, why is there so many things
Yeah.
where we're
Yeah.
like, unless you're in it, you don't get it, and they're hidden. They're kind of like silent challenges or like they're not visible to others. So I always
Yeah.
love this opportunity to share and connect. And I think that it's also really important as women in our 30s and 40s, we are being diagnosed with these same things that is adds a layer to it, right? And I love how you described the feeling of sort of joy and sadness. I have a lot of friends and clients who are also experiencing like an autism diagnosis late in life or understanding that they have an ADHD brain. And it's like, oh, there is this relief because there are tools and you know which direction to go for help, and there are more conversations happening, and there's missed opportunities, right? There's that feeling of years of lack of resources available or not understanding yourself or being able to understand or relate with others in a way, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's a whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, like mentioning that, so I know a lot of people, neurodivergent people are like invisible disabilities. That's kind of a big thing. And I always think about how that is true. Like people wouldn't know I have ADHD, but in the sense of like you said, there's that whole new like a whole nother layer of like going out on a date. My my kid is pretty well, like I mean, I don't like putting a level, but like he can cope pretty well with but even that my village is really small because there are people who can't cope with him, if that makes sense.
Totally.
And just how he vocal stems pretty much 24/7. I mean, like if he's awake, he is singing or humming or making weird sounds and he like cannot function on a one level, one volume. He's at 11 all the time. Like we know he's awake because he'll he's very good at he'll go downstairs when he wakes up because he wakes up at like 5 in the morning.
Yeah.
Um, and we leave out like some cereal for him so he can make his own like breakfast. But we know he's awake because we can hear him. Like he's just at 11, at 11 at 5 in the morning. But
Yep.
it's that kind of yeah, like reality of like he might be able to cope with someone, but they may not be able to cope with him. And that was also like I think hard for me because I have some really good friends who were very honest. They were just like, we love your son, but we just don't know how to. And one of them has now come out, like, not come out, but like has realized that they are autistic. So kind of just realizing themselves. But just that, like, yeah, my village is quite small but but those who are in it are like in it, if that makes sense. Like they are the ones who I have called on at 2 in the morning because I needed something and they came, and so that's something that I think as well, I hadn't I hadn't realized like people don't have that kind of a village, I guess.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's also something like I'm also really passionate about is like trying to help people find their village because my parents are still in the US. They are currently visiting, but like they aren't here all the time. I can't call them up. And I know there's lots of people who their parents are hours away, or across the country, but like they can't just call them up and just say, "Can you come help?" Or, they have family dynamics are always very interesting, but that idea that yeah, like we don't have a lot of people who can do that, but the ones we do have are in it. They're in it like and I always kind of say they're knee deep with us,
Love that.
which is great. But yeah, and just that kind of even for myself as I realized I had ADHD, there was a couple people who were like, "Yeah, we knew that," like, and I'm
Right.
like, "Cool, thanks for not telling me." Like,
Yeah.
but they're like, "Yeah, things you'd say about like our son or my son." They're like, "We saw them in you," and I'm like, "Oh, okay,
But
glad."
you can't see your own eyeballs with your own eyeballs, right? Like
Yeah,
you're in it. You can't necessarily see these pieces unless others tell you. And I think it's so cool that we're now aware, like more society is more aware of like what it looks like, right? How it presents. So we can start to be like, oh, I think, okay. And we can have less judgment around like, oh, that's just because her brain does it this way, right? Like
yeah, yeah,
totally.
exactly, yeah,
Um,
and yeah, go ahead.
no.
I don't
Um,
know. My brain was just off, so go ahead.
Squirrel. Yeah. I was
Yeah,
just going to ask you if you had heard of Megan Champion. She's an American as well. I think her Instagram is called On the Hard Days, and she has a community that she's built, much like from the same vein of what you're doing with the podcast, is that bringing people together who are in this and providing some support and community. If you don't have the village, if you even if you have a ton of people, you might not have people that are in it knee deep with you, right? And it's so
yeah,
important. And I'd love for you to share a little bit about how you got the podcast going and just who it serves and a little bit more about that.
yeah. So it's kind of for two groups of people. So it's for those who are in it who just want to feel seen and heard because I know when I was having conversations, I've kind of started this mums group at school who are all raising neurodivergent kids. And just hearing their stories, sharing my own story, like just sitting in a room and we're like, yeah, we get it and feel seen and heard. It's just I don't know. I always just say it's like a fre breath of fresh air. Like just knowing that I can, we have a WhatsApp group as well, and just knowing like I can put on there, we made it to school on time today, and they're gonna like celebrate that. Like it's so important for that. And so wanting the podcast to be a place where people can listen to the stories and listen to, the different guests and myself on and just feel seen and heard and feel like, yeah, that's me or that was me or I spoke to someone whose son is an adult now, and I was like, oh, there's hope. Like, especially it was like a timely conversation because it was a very hard day at home, and I was like, oh, there's hope that my child will be okay. So there's kind of that side of it, and then there's also those who want to support families or people who are neurodivergent but don't really know how or where to start, and so each conversation I try and ask that question is how can someone who's, a family member or friend who can see this in them or whatever support them. Because I think, everyone there, I think there's some people I know when I started sharing more about our experience, there were some people who messaged who was like, I didn't know what question to ask you. But thank you for sharing that because it's helped me to know how to support you or how to, talk to another friend about it or something. And so I just kind of, I think through that, realize that there are quite a few people out there who want to support, but just don't know how and are afraid they're going to offend or be too, they're
Yeah,
going to be more a burden than a help. So yeah, just offering that kind of opportunity for them to listen in to understand a little bit more about what's happening, but also give, ways, emotional, practical, spiritual ways to also help support those that they know who are neurodivergent. So yeah, it's kind of I like to say it's a place for people to feel seen and heard as well as learn and grow. Um, so that way, because I also think so it's called the unfinished idea. Partly because partly because which you would have thought like the name came ages ago and you would have thought great duh it's an unfinished idea like you have an ADHD brain you have 5 million ideas 499 of them are unfinished
finished.
um like of course you have an ADHD brain but yeah that idea that it's just we're all unfinished we're all we're all kind of I don't want to say yeah we're all learning and so that idea that yeah we have the Unfinished Idea podcast. And then I've just very slowly started to grow, yeah, the unfinished community, which is all kind of in trial right now. But it's just again that idea that we're all growing together, we're all learning together, and we're all a little unfinished. Just
I
because,
love that so much.
yeah, we're not perfect. I think that's something that I think as well, we're kind of we come, I often think when I go into kind of support meetings or things like that, like I'm rough around the edges, like I'm unfinished. I've, come from kind of chaos. So, yeah, so just the idea that we're all unfinished
I
and
love
we all
it.
have unfinished ideas.
Yes, we do. Yep. I think that is part of life for sure, especially when we are um in relationship with or ourselves neurodivergent, right? And I'll share real quick before we wrap. You inspired just this story that I want to share with you. Kind of, my son is 7 right now, so he's a few years ahead of yours, and just a story that I hope will give you some hope. He hadn't ever been invited to a birthday party. It was always like his little sister. She's the belle of the ball, all the friends, whatever. He finally gets invited to a birthday party this past weekend. And like, just also for the people listening who, if you have a child who has a friend who's neurodiverse, here are some of the things that you can be aware of if they're going to come to your house. Because as parents, like, there's so much preparation that we do with our
Yeah.
kids and coaching and like, so that they can feel like quote unquote normal and safe and happy in someone else's home. So I'm saying to my kids, so the family was Indian, and I'm like, okay, if the house smells different than our house, if their cooking is different, I don't want you to say out loud, ew, this smells, or what's that smell? I want you to remember, and you can talk about it with mom later. If the food is not something that is to your preference, if the cake is vanilla instead of chocolate, if they don't have your specific type of cookie, please don't say, ew, yuck, I don't like that. Please say, no, thank you. right? If you don't understand the game, like so many pieces of coaching need
Yeah.
to go in. These poor little kids, they work so hard to be in these situations. And so, A, it was a big deal for him just to have the invitation. But he came back and he had the best time. He did like so marvelously. It was really wonderful for me to see, but also a wonderful experience for him. So, if anyone else has a kid who has never been invited to a party or a parent who is worried that their kid might not do well in someone else's house, it is possible. It is possible, and it is a beautiful thing when you get to see it.
Yeah, yeah, he's been invited to one about a month ago and he loved it. But like you said, it was that coaching like
Yeah.
weeks before I was like, okay, so we're gonna and like I contacted we're really good friends with the mom, so it was she was a little more aware like of what our son needs, but it was probably a good 2 weeks. I was like, okay, so this is what's gonna happen, and we're gonna walk there because they don't live that far. So if it is raining, we'll have our wellies, and then we'll change it. Like I had to go through every potential thing for him, so that way, and it was like weeks before, and that's yeah, something that I think is normal. But then I talk to other friends who have neurotypical kids, and they're like, you don't just rock up, like you don't just
Right.
like
Let's go.
what? Like, yeah. Um, like, oh, okay. Um,
Oh,
but yeah, it's like you said, it's a lot of just it's a gentle encouragement, I call it. It's just like because yeah, he would be that kid who's like, so they're from Nigeria and so they cook very spicy food and we've had dinner with them before and he said, this is burning. This
right,
is like hell in my mouth. And I was
right.
like, oh my
Because
gosh.
because
Like,
there's just no
but
like that's just how the
yeah.
brain works.
Yep. And so I was like, okay, note to self. But yeah, that's very much all the coaching is, yeah, it's every day. It's for,
Yeah.
not quite as much now to go to school. Like he kind of knows the r rhythm of school, but when we start back, after breaks, so every about 6, 7 weeks we have a week break, and a few days before we go back, I start kind of, all right, we're gonna get our brains back into school mode, or like
Yeah.
yeah, just trying to get them ready and prepared.
It's a lot. It's a lot of behind the scenes work that you don't see the child doing, that you don't see the parent doing, which is why it can be so taxing as well, which is why, like, one of the reasons I'm so passionate about teaching time management, especially to either parents of kids who are neurodivergent or to people who are neurodivergent. Like, that's a whole other thing. If you're neurodivergent and you're raising a neurodivergent kid, like, your time's all over the map. So I'm really,
Yeah.
and guys, I'm going to be going on Greer's podcast and talking about it over there. So we're going to make sure that we link so that you can hear the sort of continued conversation over there. But it's just been such a pleasure being able to chat with you and hearing
Yeah.
your story. And I know that there's a lot of listeners who are going to feel really seen and heard and will want to keep learning and growing over with the unfinished idea. So, where's the best place for us to keep learning from you, keep connected, and find that podcast?
Yeah, so the podcast is released anywhere that you get your podcast. So just search the unfinished idea. I'm the one with the brain. That's kind of how I class it. And then yeah, I'm on socials, mostly Instagram and Facebook. So that's another way to stay connected. But yeah, thank you very much for having me and letting me join in with the conversation.
Yeah, I so appreciate it. And guys, if you want to head over to the show notes, you'll see all the links right there. You don't have to search them. We'll have them there, easy access for you. And until next week, keep on growing like a mother.